The Waikato War of 1863 to 1864 was a significant event to New Zealanders for various reasons. Firstly, the war saw the Kingatanga movement of the Maori King, established in 1858, lose 1,202,172 acres of prime agricultural land. This large confiscation of land was made possible by the 1863 Land Settlements Act. This was the second largest confiscation in New Zealand by the government in the North Island. This affected not only the Kingatanga movement, but also other tribes who would subsequently lose their land to the Settlements Act. As a consequence, the Kingites had to relocate further south to Maniapoto land. Taranaki tribes Ngāti Awa and Ngāti Ruanui both lost their lands on the 2nd of September 1865 to the Land Settlements Act. Governor George Grey issued a proclamation to seize their land. He said, "The war which commenced at Owakura is at an end." This referring to the Owakura ambush that saw 9 colonial soldiers killed by Ruby and his Kingites. This is a primary source that shows the Kingatanga movement were not the only group of Maori that had their land confiscated from them. The confiscations in Taranaki left many hapu to become dependent on the Crown for land and other necessities. This shows that the Waikato War was a very significant event to many iwi across the North Island that had disputes with the Crown. It affected not only their land through confiscation, but also their general livelihoods. For as Ngā Paua Tamati said in 1872, if the blood of our people had only been spilled, and the land remained, then this trouble would have been over long ago. As this quote shows, the confiscation of Waikato land was very significant to the Kingite people, and has still affected them long after the confiscation. For to state that they would rather die and retain mana than lose their land shows how tapu insignificant their land was to them. The loss of Kingite land to the Crown saw settlers take advantage of the situation and migrate to the Waikato. The settlers used the already established military redoubts along the Waikato River. The settlements of the Waikato saw one of New Zealand's largest towns settled, Hamilton, from the redoubts of East and West Hamilton. Today, Hamilton has a population of 150,000 and its own university. The war was a contest for sovereignty between the colonial forces and the Kingite forces. The origins of this dispute can be traced back to the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840. This very important document was made in 2 languages, English and Maori. The writing process was rushed, and that left the finished product with flaws. One of these flaws was that the word sovereignty was used in only the English translation, rather than the Maori. Instead, the Maori translation, they used the word Ariki Tangaroa, or Chief of Chiefs, when referring to the Queen's rule on New Zealand. This word was very different from sovereignty, and it does not talk about a loss of mana or forfeiture of lands. The Kingites were defending their sovereignty by attempting to stop invading colonial forces. The Kingatanga believed that the treaty was on their side due to the translation of the treaty, in which the Maori chiefs thought they were still in control over their own people. For Maori, the signing of the treaty was a way of receiving increased trade with Europeans. The settlers saw the Kingatanga as a threat to the sovereignty of the Queen, and because the Kingites were an anti-land sale movement, the Kingites used their influence to blackmail other tribes in Taranaki to stop them from selling land for settlement. Therefore, the Kingatanga was seen as hindering the settlement process by stopping other tribes from selling land. The Waikato War was started by Governor George Grey to weaken an attempt to destroy the Maori King movement. Grey wanted to take action due to the constant pressure he had coming from settlers who demanded land to settle on. Grey also wanted to assert authority on the King movement because it was a threat to further land sales. A quote from the English newspaper The Daily Telegraph shows the view of the British media that the Kingatanga were rebelling against British sovereignty. War is unavoidable that the disaffection of the Maori population has been much underestimated, and that Sir George Grey's efforts to pacify the natives have failed. We may indeed conclude that the time has come when the sword must be unsheathed, and a war of races commenced. This quote is a primary source that was republished in the Daily Southern Cross paper in New Zealand. This is a very biased source, through racism shown towards the Maori. It does, however, show that Grey failed to control the Maori, and specifically the Kingatanga movement. This led him to take drastic action against the movement. He did this through planning to invade the Waikato. This source could be media propaganda, where they are attempting to help acquire more colonial troops to prepare for the Waikato invasion. A quote from the historian Keith Sinclair on the causes of the war show his view. The first was that Rui had ordered the ambush in Taranaki. This was true, though it must be added that in the eyes of the extremists, Grey had provided the just cause or take for the war. Sinclair says that in the eyes of the extremists, Grey had provided the just cause for the war. This extract shows his non-biased view on the causes of the Waikato invasion, and how he refers to people believing that the invasion of war was properly justified with the evidence of the ambush on colonial soldiers in Taranaki. Sinclair then goes on to say, furthermore, as Gorst pointed out later, Grey had no defence against the charge that he was punishing the Waikato as a whole for the acts of Rui. Sinclair refers to a primary source from John Gorst, who was a civil commissioner in the Waikato. Gorst points out that Governor Grey could not use Rui's ambush as a just cause to invade the whole of the Waikato. This proves that Grey's main cause for invading the Waikato is invalid, and that it was one of his many excuses to benefit the government by attempting to cripple the King movement, while also possibly taking their land. Grey therefore was able to manipulate the British colonial government to send him additional troops and resources to end the impending threat of the Maori King. This invasion by Grey was not properly justified because Grey made assumptions on the King movement rather than using actual evidence. For Grey labelled the Kingatanga as rebels so that he could later be able to confiscate their land. He proclaimed this on the 9th of July 1863, when Grey sent out an ultimatum to the people between Auckland and the Waikato. Grey based his view of the Kingites on a few hapu of the Kingatanga, who sent warriors to aid the Taranaki tribes without the King's consent. This is also an invalid reason to call all Kingites rebels when it was only a small group of the whole movement who acted to aid the Taranaki iwis on their own accord. Sinclair also has the same view that Grey cannot start a war just for a minority group or person's actions. James Belich, also a historian, has a similar view to Sinclair on the causes of the invasion. He says in his book The New Zealand Wars that the bulk of the troops were shifted to Auckland and the scene changed to the Waikato. On 11 July, alleging Kingite instigation of the Okura ambush and a determined and bloodthirsty plot to attack Auckland, Grey ordered the invasion of Kingite territory. This quote shows that there were multiple causes of the invasion and that rumours about the ferocity of the Kingites spread. This is a very similar perspective to Sinclair, who also states there were multiple causes of the invasion, including the Okura ambush in Taranaki. James Belich and Keith Sinclair are two historians who have confronting views on other New Zealand wars and their significance. They both had one-sided views that made them biased sources, but in saying this, they both seem to agree on the causes of the Waikato War. This is very surprising, as either do not favour one side or show any bias. Instead, they are reliable sources that are very useful. On the 9th of July 1863, Governor Grey sent out an ultimatum to all Maori living between the Waikato and Auckland. He said those who wage war against Her Majesty or remain in arms, threatening the lives of her peaceable subjects, must take the consequences of their acts. They must understand that they will forfeit the right to the possession of their lands guaranteed to them by the Treaty of Waikato. This primary source shows Grey's intentions of confiscating Kingatanga land by claiming that the Kingites had been waging war against the Queen. Grey claims that the Kingite movement were challenging the authority of the Queen's sovereignty, and their consequences for taking the step is the confiscation of their land. This is a very significant statement, which we will see the Land Settlements Act become legal later on that year. On December the 3rd, the Act was passed, which, like Grey stated, allowed his government to confiscate the land of rebel Maori groups in iwi. Grey had several reasons for invading the Waikato. Firstly, he saw the movement as a threat to his own rule as governor. Grey wanted to be the sole governor and leader of New Zealand, but the Kingatanga made many North Island tribes seek other leadership than Grey's. For Grey, this annoyed him to the point of wanting to invade the Waikato. Grey then used excuses like the Okura ambush and a planned attack on Auckland by the Kingites. These excuses allowed Grey to place the blame of the invasion on the Kingites' shoulders. The invasion of the Waikato commenced on the 17th of July in 1863, when Lieutenant General Duncan Cameron and his force of around 16,000 colonial and kupapa troops crossed the boundary set by the Maori King, the Mana Ata Whiriwhiri stream. They would face a force of some 5,000 loyal Kingaite troops. There were 3 times more colonial troops than the Kingaite troops. The British colonial troops had superior technologies that gave them an advantage. Some of these technologies include 2 gunboats provided by the British government called the Avon and the Pioneer. As historian Matthew Wright says, Riwi was still reluctant to fight Cameron in pitched battles, where the British technology and superior numbers gave them the advantage. This quote is secondary evidence that backs up my key historic ideas of the British having superior technologies and a far greater force of full-time soldiers. Matthew Wright is a well-known historian on New Zealand history. He is a very reliable and useful source on the Waikato. The 2 gunboats provided to play a major role in taking control of the Waikato. Cameron's strategies include to use the gunboats to transport soldiers up and down the Waikato River, also to attack Rui's Pa with 2-prong attacks. This way the battles could be finished much faster and less Kingites would be able to escape. These strategies proved successful throughout the war. However, the Maori strategy changed halfway through the war. This was because Riwi had built his pas closer to the Waikato River, like at Miriman. This had allowed for Cameron to use his strategies to maximum effect. Riwi decided to move his pas further inland and to hinder the progress of Cameron as much as possible. He also had to keep his main asset alive, which was King Toawhiru himself. He was the symbol of the whole Kingaite movement, and his death would cause chaos among the Kingites, and the movement could disband. Riwi did manage to keep the king alive, which saw the movement live on, which is still present today. As Matthew Wright also says, but there were limits to how far Maori could retreat. The Waikato heartland lay ahead with its vital agricultural areas. If the British took these, the king movement would be defeated. This quote from Wright shows the change of Riwi's strategy from just falling back to having to hold ground before that English could reach the agricultural lands. This was a significant task that Riwi had to undertake, and one that was impossible for a smaller and poorer army. This extract also displays the taking of the farmlands could ensure the king movement to be defeated. In Wright's point of view, defeat is seen as losing control of your land and major resources, while to other people like Grey, defeat for the Kingites would be the total destruction of the movement itself. This is a reliable source that contains useful secondary evidence on Riwi's change of strategy. Riwi's last stand occurred at Arakau Pa from the 31st of March to the 2nd of April 1864. Riwi had gained allies in his fight against the British. They included war parties from Ngāhi Toa and Ngāti Ruakawa. On the 30th of March, Riwi was still completing his part with the help of 300 men, women and children. A British survey party observed the building of the pa, and an attack was prepared by Brigadier General Robert Carey. By the next day the British had an excess of 1,400 soldiers, while Riwi still had the 300 men, women and children. They attacked on the 31st, but their initial attacks were repulsed by their defenders. On the 32nd, an artillery bombardment of the pa was carried out, with the British having 4 trenches made. Cameron gave the defenders the option of surrender, and for the women and children to leave safely. Instead, the defenders chanted, "Friend, I will fight on forever, forever, and forever." This is a primary quote that shows the determination and loyalty that the Kingites and their allies had towards the Maori king. This is very significant to give up your life for a cause, and shows that the Kingites believed they were part of something important. This is a reliable source as it appears in many other primary and secondary sources. After the reply by the defenders, they attempted to break out of the pa on the 2nd of April, which saw many casualties as the British rushed on the pa. Around 160 Maori were killed out of the 300, and only 17 British were also killed. Orakura was a clear British victory, which was much needed for morale. This battle was unique compared to other Waikato encounters, for unlike other battles, women and children involved in this battle were included in the casualties. As Neil Finlay says in his book Sacred Soils, up to this point there has been no decisive victory in the Waikato campaign. Cameron had wanted a battle that would crush the Kingites and the King movement once and for all. Kerry now saw an opportunity to make this happen. This is a secondary source that comes from Neil Finlay, a musician who has a passion for history, in which he has been inspired by James Belich. He does not have a biased view, and is useful to show insight throughout the war. This evidence supports that Iroquois was a major British victory that was needed by the British to show them defeating the Kingatanga. This battle is significant as it was the last encounter between British forces and Waikato Kingite forces. This battle left the Kingites to retreat into Maniapoto land and the British to return to Auckland. Oricau was seen as the final encounter in the Waikato War that saw the British come back victorious in their eyes. It is also famous and a significant battle because of the famous saying, "Friend, I will fight you on forever and ever." Also, Araucau is perceived by many as the last battle of the Waikato conflict, although another battle involving the British and Kingite allies occurred later in 1864. This battle was called Gate Pa and it took place in Tauranga. Pene Takatuia was the leader of the Murray forces from Ngā Tirangi and the Murray genius behind Gate Pa. As James Belich describes the Pa, the Gate Pa was sited on a neck of land 300 yards wide, flanked by the tidal sums of the Tauranga harbour. It consisted of 2 redoubts. This quote is useful to show the great size and complexity of the Pa. This is also seen in the primary photos and diagrams that show a breakdown of the Pa and its defensive structures. The British bombardment of the Pa lasted for 8 hours under the command of Cameron. The 68th Regiment were ordered to hold the back of the Pa to stop any escapes, and on the 29th of April 1864, Cameron gave the order for the 43rd Regiment and a naval brigade to attack the Pa with 300 men. The attacks failed due to the deaths of multiple officers. This left the men confused, and when the 68th attacked from the opposite side, the 43rd Regiment believed that Murray reinforcements had arrived. This miscommunication and the well-constructed defences of Gate Pa were the downfall of the British. As Neil Finlay says, in effect the Pa itself was a trap. The British had lost 35 killed and 75 wounded in the battle. This was twice the Murray casualties. Gate Pa was one of the largest defeats in the New Zealand Wars, and it saw the British again underestimate the enemy. This battle, however, did not have a significant impact on the already finished Waikato War, as the confiscation process of the Waikato War was in progress. Instead, this battle defines Murray resistance and strength in New Zealand wars, and proves how formidable an opponent they are. After Oricau, the Murrays resorted to the old strategy by manning a series of fortifications which function as a fourth line for the defence of Waikato. This quote from Belich talks about the movement of the Kingites to Maniapoto land further south. To stop a British advancement, Riri made 3 paths near the boundary with the Waikato and its land. This is a consequence of the war, as Riri had to move and make more defensive positions within his own territory to protect himself and the Kingites. They feared that the British would continue to drive at the Kingites, but in fact they were left alone. This is a minor consequence that only has significance to the Kingites and Maniapoto for a short period of time. But a more significant consequence was the amount of land that was returned to the Kingites after the land confiscation. For out of the 1,250,000 acres or so that was confiscated, only 50,000 acres was returned to the Kingites. 225,000 acres was designated to native land reserve, and 150,000 acres was subdivided military settlements and allocated to soldiers who had fought in the campaign. The rest of the land was sold to settlers for a profit. So, as a consequence of the land confiscation from the Waikato War, it saw soldiers and settlers that were able to settle in the Waikato while the Kingites stayed protected in the Waikato land. This was significant as it saw the creation and growth of townships that are still around today, like Hamilton. In conclusion, the Waikato War was a significant event to New Zealand for multiple reasons. First, the confiscation of Waikato land by the Crown in 1865 affected not only just the Kingatanga directly but also the tribe Manea Te Popa, who had to consequently share their land with the Kingatanga. The Kingatanga movement never moved back into the Waikato land and have lived with the Manea Te Popa ever since. And this shows how long a term and impact the war has had on the Kingatanga.